Welcome to World War II Indiana Landmarks, Episode 9, the Ernie Pyle World War II Museum in Dana. I'm your host, Ron May, author of the book, World War II Indiana Landmarks. The location for this museum is in the small town of Dana, located on the far west edge of central Indiana on the Indiana-Illinois border. It's just a mile north of Highway 36 and is 74 miles due west of Indianapolis. Dana is the birthplace of Ernie Pyle, the most well-known and loved correspondent who covered World War II. Today, the town is home to the Ernie Pyle World War II Museum. The museum features the farmhouse where Pyle was born and lived for the first several years of his life. The home is in the style of a traditional farmhouse from the late 1800s. Beside the home are two World War II-era Quonset huts filled with exhibits tracing Pyle's dispatch coverage during World War II. Pyle's career began while he was a student at Indiana University, writing for the Indiana Daily student newspaper. He got his first job as a reporter for the LaPorte Herald-News in northwest Indiana. Less than a year later, he moved to Washington, D.C. after accepting a job offer with the Washington Daily News. Years later, Pyle became a traveling columnist for the Scripps Howard chain of newspapers. For 7 years, he traveled throughout the United States, making stops in every state and writing stories on people and places. December 1940, after the start of World War II in Europe, Pyle crossed the Atlantic Ocean and arrived in London to witness and write on the German Blitz campaign to bomb London and other parts of England. He stayed there for several months. In the attack on Pearl Harbor 1 year later, he returned to London and became an official war correspondent, covering the stories of U.S. forces in combat theaters. Pyle arrived in North Africa in November 1942 to cover the stories of the American forces involved in the invasion, codenamed Operation Torch. Writing from Africa, he quickly developed the pattern of focusing on the common enlisted soldiers and capturing their thoughts and feelings of combat service. Following the conclusion of the campaign in North Africa, he followed the army to Italy, landing at Sicily in July 1943. Allied forces as they made their way up the boot of Italy and sent dispatches home of their service. In Italy, Pyle experienced the challenging weather conditions and the harsh combat. He returned to England in April 1944 to cover the preparations for the massive amphibious landing in France, codenamed Operation Overlord. Pyle witnessed D-Day from aboard a ship on the English Channel and landed 1 day later on Omaha Beach, witnessing the devastation that occurred during the landing. 2 months later, he was part of the victory celebration of the liberation of Paris by the Allied forces. After a brief visit home to see his wife, he flew to the Pacific theater of the war in December 1944. During the early months of 1945, Pyle made stops on several U.S. Navy ships, visited with the sailors on board, capturing their service stories. He also spent time with the Marines on the islands of Saipan and Guam. In mid-April, he landed with Army forces on the island of Ieshima, just off the larger island of Okinawa. On April 18th, Ernie Pyle was shot and killed by a Japanese sniper. He was a few months shy of his 45th birthday. A burial service was held on the island of Ieshima as he and others were temporarily buried there. In 1949, his body was transported back to the United States and he was buried at the National Cemetery of the Pacific at Punchbowl Crater, Oahu, Hawaii. His body remains there today. Pyle was the most gifted and beloved correspondent in World War II. His articles appeared in 400 daily and 300 weekly newspapers throughout the United States, making him the most well-known war correspondent. The Ernie Pyle World War II Museum in Dana traces his early life as well as his entrance into the war. Dioramas with mannequins visually set the stage for some of his articles. Visitors have the option of reading or listening to many of Pyle's articles at the exhibits. Through the exhibits, visitors can also see and feel the scenes that inspired Pyle to write some of his greatest articles. Especially moving is Pyle's story of Captain Henry T. Wasco of Belton, Texas, who was killed during the war in Italy. Pyle witnessed fellow soldiers under Wasco's leadership coming to say goodbye to their dead captain. His story, The Death of Captain Wasco, became one of Pyle's most famous and respected articles. There are display cases throughout the museum that show artifacts of Pyle's life and trace his war service as correspondent. On the drive to the Ernie Pyle Museum, you will travel on the Ernie Pyle Memorial Highway, which is part of U.S. Highway 36 near Dana. There alongside the road, just a few miles east of the museum, is the Ernie Pyle Rest Stop. It includes a memorial to him, similar to the one erected on the island of Ieshima, where he first died. Indiana University in Bloomington also pays tribute to Ernie Pyle. In front of the IU Media School of Journalism at Franklin Hall is a wonderful statue of Ernie Pyle, depicting his war service as a correspondent. Inside Franklin Hall, at the lower level, is a display of some of Pyle's possessions, as well as framed photographs of him and newspaper articles, as well as certificates. Learn more about Ernie Pyle and the museum that honors him in my new book, World War II Indiana Landmarks, available for purchase on my website or wherever books are sold.
And while on my website, check out my trilogy of Indiana World War II veteran service stories.
By the way, I also perform a one-person drama on the life of Ernie Pyle in a program called Stories from the Warfront. Contact me if you want more information.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode.